Hey friends, welcome to the Rhythms for Life podcast, where each week we talk about rhythms for building resilience so you can take charge of your mental, spiritual, and relational health.
These ideas come from Rebekah's best-selling book, Building a Resilient Life: How Adversity Awakens Strength, Hope, and Meaning. So grab your copy, invite your friends, and let's build resilience together.
Welcome back. I'm Rebekah.
And I'm Gabe.
Happy November.
I know, we're
halfway through.
We're so ready for Thanksgiving, though. And it's up on us.
I know.
In another week.
I've already tested one turkey last week.
That's right, for Friendsgiving.
Yes, we had Friendsgiving.
It was the best.
It was amazing. And I have a Friendsgiving guide. If your guys are just tuning in and realizing this, grab it, because now's the time. Like, you can do the plan, work the plan. It comes with conversation starters, place settings, a menu, and the infamous turkey that has a bird blanket over it.
We had so much fun with this with our friends. And I know for a lot of you, you're like, hey, if I haven't planned a Friendsgiving yet, I'm just going to do Thanksgiving.
Yes.
And you should. And use all of this, the recipes, the questions, the ways to get just great conversation going amongst your family. And you can download the Friendsgiving guide for free at RebekahLyons.com/Friendsgiving. We had a homemade turkey Rebekah made from the farm right down the road from us that was butchered the day before.
I know.
And hey, it was fresh, juicy.
That thing was big, though. It was so heavy I could barely get it.
Well, and the bone broth that you created out of it, jars upon jars.
I think I'm going Amish. I mean, what is happening? I've made like 3 rounds of bone broth from that same bird and like 2 turkey chilies. You would think that we're rationing our food. We have no food coming in the door.
It's so
Between
good.
that and marinara constantly from the tomatoes that are still growing in the garden. What is up with our fall? I mean, what is up with November?
The Tennessee weather is always unpredictable, but it's been a long fall, which has been awesome.
Remarkably warm, and I am not complaining.
We love it. It's 70 degrees today.
I know, and I wore a sweater,
but it's about to be
boiling.
Freezing.
Yeah,
tomorrow.
That's what they keep saying.
And tomorrow we do start our emotional health retreat. We're excited. So many of you coming in. We're going to have a great time, couple days. Be our last retreat for a little while, so we're sad about that because we're taking a little break in the spring. We're still mapping out our plans.
We've got some fun stuff. There's a big thing happening in the spring that we will announce in January.
Yes.
So stay tuned.
But it may not be a retreat.
It will, yeah.
But it does involve you. So we'll let you know more. I'm sure you're on the edge of your seats right now. Please tell us. But today, Rebekah, we're talking about a topic that you have talked about for, 5 years ago. Rhythms of Renewal came out. You had a whole chapter on tech detox. We talk about technology a lot. But there has been an awakening this year, like big time. It's hit the masses. Everybody's aware of the problems that our digital devices seem to be causing, whether it's mental health, whether we look at teenagers, distraction, inability to think clearly. I mean, so much is happening. The science, the research, the data is in. And so today we want to talk more about what does that mean for you?
Yeah. Absolutely. And we're excited about this conversation because tech detox has to be an intentional thing. For me in that chapter 5 years ago, when I wrote that, it was about my dad passing and me hitting depression. And I didn't really want to hemorrhage publicly. I didn't need to show up online every day and process that. I needed to just be with my people and get away from that and just grieve and heal. And you need time for that to happen. So often our screens distract us from feeling pain.
Yeah. And I think today we're going to interview Darren Whitehead. He wrote a book called The Digital Fast. He's the pastor of our church, so that's been fun over the last 2 years. We've taken a month as an entire community to say, hey, let's get off our devices to the point that we turn them into utility devices that work for us, but not distraction devices. There's a whole strategy to it that's you're going to love because it's simple, but it's something you can do as your family. And one of the things we're doing through THINQ is we're inviting you as families, as friends, as small groups to commit to doing a digital fast. You can learn more about it at digitalfast2025.com. You'll hear us talk a little bit about it with Darren. But I also want to let you know that one of the unique things we do through THINQ is try to create environments where you can have this conversation in your living room with your kids. Because let's face it, it's a lot of our kids that feel this pressure even more than we do as adults and push us. And they're like, I'm not going to feel connected to my friends if I'm on my phone. Well, we've created a series of conversations through THINQ Media. It's free. All you need to do is give a small donation of $1 or more to THINQ Media. And when you do, we're going to give you a Let's Talk Digital Detox conversation guide. And you're going to have 5 talks that you can listen to with your family on your smart TV using our THINQ Media app or on your phone or your laptop by going to thinkmedia.com/tech detox. It's going to create a great conversation. Set aside about 90 minutes with those you love, friends or family, and have a conversation about what you're about to hear from our conversation with Darren. This is so practical. We all can participate, but part of it is being aware of the impact that this technology and our use of it is having on our relationships. And so I hope for this next few moments, you'll be able to learn as we did and start to ask the big question, what am I going to do to take back control over my digital life? Let's listen in now to Darren Whitehead. Welcome to the Rhythms for Life podcast. I'm Gabe alongside Rebekah, and today we're going to have an incredible conversation about how digital tech invades our lives and what we can do about it. And I'm excited for you to get to hear from somebody who's done a lot of work on this subject, not only personally in his own life, but also leading an entire community, congregation, and now coming soon, hundreds, over 1,000 different churches that are going to be participating in a digital fast. So I want to welcome Darren Whitehead.
Hello, sir.
Hey, it's good to have you with us today.
So good to be here.
Darren, this is just an excuse for us to hang out.
Let's just hang out. Yeah.
We have such a backstory with Darren. Goes back about half our lives, really.
Half our lives.
Yeah. So over 20 years, we'll just leave it at that. Darren and I did share the same birthday in this year. So we're both a little elder and wiser than Gabe.
A new decade.
The 50-year mark.
But it's good hanging out with this young buck.
I know, right?
I keep him young.
We can teach him some things.
What's fun about Darren and Darren, your story is you came over from Australia many years ago, those who haven't met you before. And another good friend of yours, John Tyson, who's a friend of ours, been a part of this podcast and the things that we do. You guys were like best mates over in Australia.
Yes.
And then you find yourself here in America. When you look back on that now, I mean, just what's your general sense about this? Like, it has to be crazy just to kind of think about where you were, what you're doing now.
I'm filled with wonder. And John is like a reference point to me. You know, we met when we were in high school. I was 16. He was 14.
I wish I could have known you guys then.
Oh, man. He was a piece of work as a 14-year-old, I'm telling you. That was before he was a Christian.
Wow.
And, I mean, he preached at our church just a week and a half ago.
Yeah.
And, we've just been through so much life together, so many decades of life together. You know, they say you can make new friends, but you can't make old friends.
That's true.
And to be in another country on the other side of the world from where we both grew up, but to have each other is it's a real gift.
Well, John's been a gift to the church. I mean, so many people now have come to appreciate his gift of teaching and study, and especially related to cultural issues. It was fun, though, the other night. I was with the two of you, and he was expressing how much you took him under your wing during that season when he was a teenager and didn't know Christ.
Yeah.
And that he literally credits you as his guide, his friend, his mentor for finding him in the midst of that environment and shaping and discipling him. I'd never heard that part of the story because you wouldn't tell me that story. But John was reflecting on it. And so this is a man who's been very faithful with discipleship, understanding the next gen for many years. And now, Darren, you lead a church of the city. That's our church here in Franklin. But there's also multiple locations in the Nashville area, having quite an impact because you've decided that a church of the city means it's not a church that's just for us.
Yeah.
This is about a bigger vision. Would you just describe a little bit about just when you began this over a decade ago? What did God put in your heart, and why did you even call it Church of the City?
Yeah, I mean, we really had a dream that we would want to try to engage the community, really trying to understand what are the biggest challenges that are going on in our city, in our state, in our community. I'm married. My wife is a social worker, and when Brandy and I got married, she was working in the juvenile court system as a victim witness advocate. And so right from the beginning of our partnership, our marriage, she would really educate me on what it was like to engage societal problems. And in one sense, the vision of our church became the fruition of our partnership. I was kind of bringing the ministry side, and she was bringing the community engagement side. And Church of the City just came out of a dream to serve those in need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you've done that remarkably well. We're so thankful for the backstory with you guys, though, as friends. Like you just said, you can't make old friends, and it is a joy. And I think we're all learning, like, almost how rare it is to walk with one another, running alongside for decades. Mm-hmm. And even John being our pastor in New York City, and then moving here, and then Darren being our pastor here in Franklin, and even just like the brotherhood and sisterhood of all those, their spouses and me and families and kids, and now we're launching kids together. It's just surreal, and we're so thankful because part of it is there's an intentionality, and right, this just doesn't happen where you just like run alongside and you're praying that you have the long view, and that you run that race, that long obedience in the same direction that Eugene Peterson says. And part of that, I think, is the intentionality that we have had around our kitchen table, in our living rooms together about like, what do we want our lives to be about? What do we want the legacy that we're handing our kids to be about? How do we have this generational handoff where we are raising kids, Lord willing, that like love and fear him? And part of that has come into the conversation we're going to have today. We're just a couple years ahead of your girls, our kids, and like having to navigate tech and having to navigate phones and social media, especially in the last decade when it was emerging but untested. And we were all guinea pigs as parents as well as kids. Yeah. We could see like early symptoms of anxiety in our daughter and our son, when they were 12, 13, a couple years before your kids were that ages. But then all of a sudden we're like, oh, this is snowballing quickly. And so today we're going to just deep dive into tech detox, what we've seen happen in this first generation raised in social media ubiquity, meaning they're talking to everyone but connecting with no one. They seem like they have this big platform, but they're in a dark room by themselves. Right. And so this leads to so much isolation and anxiety. We know this. Everyone's talking about this. This is not new information. So we're not going to elaborate or elongate too much on that because we're more about proactive steps for solutions. So let's talk about your project, the Tech Detox book, and what catalyzed you to write this and then do this huge church-wide Tech Detox.
Yeah, so I wrote the digital fast as a response to leading our church through this discipline. And this really came in 2023. We start out every year doing a 21 days of prayer and fasting. And January is always that each year. And people were saying to me, I'm thinking about maybe doing a digital detox or a digital fast. And I thought, that's really interesting, but it is different to what prayer and fasting are. Right. Fasting is probably the most neglected spiritual practice from the ancient world. We don't want to do it because it's uncomfortable, But I really started thinking about, man, these devices have seeped their way into our lives. And having a conversation about this and considering doing this as an entire church is a really intriguing idea. And so in May of 23, we decided to do an experiment with our church, and we led everyone through 30 days of a digital fast. And I was so nervous doing this because I just thought, I think people are going to be like, hey, pastor, like, teach the Bible, stay in your lane. What's this got to do with us?
Don't
mess with our phones. I thought, my kids are, looking at me like we're going to be hated at school. And, it turned out to be one of the most important things we've ever done. Yeah. I mean, it was profound. Now, what we didn't realize at the time as we were doing this is the power of collective action. Yeah. So social scientists call this a collective action problem. That is, we all know these phones are having a detrimental impact on our mental health, and yet none of us want to step back by ourselves. You ask a teenager, why don't you just get off social media if it's making you anxious? They're like, I can't get off social media. Like, I'll be the only one. I'll be left out. This is the fear of missing out, right? And so what we discovered is that a way to address a collective action problem is with collective action. And a church is the perfect environment for this because it is the nucleus of different age groups and different people. So you have teenagers and their small groups and their parents and their grandparents and their neighbors, and they're all doing it together. All of a sudden, soccer teams and volleyball clubs, and everyone is going, we're going to take a period of time where we all step back from being attached to these devices. But instead of this fear of missing out, kind of everyone I know is doing it as well.
Right.
And there's this shared experience. And it's actually easier to do than if you try to do it on your own. When I ask people, have you ever done a digital detox? Almost everyone says the same thing. No, but I need to.
Right.
And it turns out that doing it as a church is easier than doing it on your own.
Yeah, and I think the social scientist data is in, and that's been the remarkable thing. You know, Jonathan Haidt, many people have heard of this book because everybody seems to be talking about it. He's been on multiple podcast platforms over the last several months, but his book, The Anxious Generation, really laid out the case from research that said, look, the decade of research is in. We're seeing how much this technology's creating suicidal ideation.
Yes.
It's creating loneliness. It literally, the way it manipulates the brain, the way it creates addiction amongst generations, especially girls, even more so than boys.
Yes.
We now have to deal with it. Like, we can't just act like this is no big deal. And I know you and I've had conversations with Jonathan specifically about this, and he was so encouraged to hear about what you had led for our church, because for him, he's going, look, this is a collective action problem. Like, you can do it as an individual, but you need a group. And then you had a solution. And so it's beautiful. Even this fall, there's so much good conversation between the three of us about where this is going, because coming up in January now, hundreds of churches are already signed up. I think it's going to be over 1,000. I mean, I think we're going to have so many churches, schools, and communities that say, we want to do this 28-day digital fast. And that's the beauty of it, is you didn't just do it for our church. You then felt convicted to write about it, to lay out the plan, to help anyone else who said, hey, I want to take my people through this. How do I do it? So talk a little bit about, what does 28 days look like when you're saying to people, let's do a digital fast? I mean, are we all throwing our phones away?
Yeah.
Are we going to dumb phones? I mean, how does this play out for somebody that's hearing this for the first time and they're going, wait, I have work. I got to get on a plane. I don't even know how to do a boarding pass. You know, what do we do?
Yeah, so we want to find a healthy way forward, because there's got to be something between addiction or Amish, right? We've got to find something that is a reasonable way forward. And so we want people to think about the apps on their smartphone through the lens of distraction versus utility. Not all apps are created equal. So distraction apps are things like social media and news and video apps and games, even email. The things that become the time wormholes in your life, you know, when you pull up at the lights and you grab your phone and you just start doom scrolling cat videos. Like, these are the things that take our time. Right. And reduce the hope is to reduce your smartphone to a utility device. So these are things like phone and text and GPS, a calculator. You know, when you board a plane on Southwest and you scan your phone, you don't then get on the plane and play with the Southwest app for the next 45 minutes, you know? Yeah. So you reduce your phone down to a utility device. You're still able to still interact in the world, still do your job, but get all the distraction stuff off of your phone. We want you to do that for 28 days. And there is 4 movements of 7 days in the 28-day journey. So the first movement is to detach, and we want people collectively to remove these apps, and you are probably going to feel some degree of withdrawal, as funny as it sounds. But if you do it again, if you do it as a community, you kind of like misery loves company, right? You kind of like from talking to other people, you kind of like, man, I need a shot, but it's okay. You know, you get through the first 7 days. The next 7-day movement is to discover. And this is when you start to notice all the things you weren't noticing because you had your head buried in a glowing rectangle, right?
Right.
And you discover things about other people, your kids, your spouse, your friends. You discover things about yourself. You discover the feelings that you are covering up by distracting yourself. And we do this intuitively. So when we feel shame, or we feel anxious, or we feel afraid, or we feel sad, the way that we can soothe ourselves, and we don't even realize we're doing this, is to grab our phone and just start looking at stuff, because they're unpleasant feelings that we don't want to feel. Well, you start to discover how you're really doing. You know, it's like, how you doing? I don't know, you know? Well, you get rid of all this distraction, you start to be much more self-aware. The other thing is you have a greater degree to be able to hear the voice of God.
Yeah.
Think about how much all of this discretionary time that we have in our day to just be aware of God's presence has been eaten up by digital devices.
Right.
So that's the second movement. The next movement, the next 7 days, we just call simply delight. And it is like rebooting the senses of your body. And when we talked to Jonathan Haidt, he was most excited about this bit. Remember what he said? He was kind of like, can I tell you the brain science on why this is working?
Right.
He said, your dopamine receptors take a couple of weeks to reset. So many people are hitting dopamine in their brain so many times throughout the day that dopamine is no longer bringing joy or pleasure. And so they've sort of just numbed their brain. Well, if you reset, it takes a couple of weeks, dopamine starts to bring you joy and pleasure again. And you start to be aware of the weather and the people around you. It's like a reboot of all of your senses, and it's delightful. The final 7-day movement is to determine. You want to determine, what do I want my long-term digital habits to look like as I've rebooted myself, as I'm coming out of this. And we encourage people to Marie Kondo their digital life. That is, she does the whole cleaning out your closet, asking, does this piece of clothing spark joy? Well, I want people to Marie Kondo their digital life and ask yourself, does putting Instagram back on your phone spark joy? Does putting TikTok back on your phone spark joy? Or are you going to create a new digital rule of life where you interact on those platforms in different ways rather than having them with you as an appendage all the time?
I love that you're talking about benefits. This happened for me a couple years ago, and I'm so glad that it's happening in collective action. But I felt like the Lord asked me about 5 years ago to get off digital for Lent. And I was like, I think he was just kidding. And so June 1 comes by, and my dad had passed actually during that season of Lent. And I fell into this deep depression. And the Lord was like, hey, that invitation to get off screens is still there. And by June 1, I remember waking up one morning, if I don't do this today, it was like this urgency in my spirit. If I don't do this today, it's direct disobedience and defiance to God. And so I finally just said, okay, Lord, got off that summer for about 100 days. And 3 things happened, 3 benefits happened for me personally. The first one was I started dreaming again, and not just in dreams and sleep, but also in my journal. I started to write, like, just, long form, open dialogue with God, and new revelations, new ideas would emerge that weren't copying somebody else online or something I thought might just revelations and his kindness of, again, like you said, hearing that still small voice. It just invites you. He's not condemning you. It's always invitation to more relationship. The second was I started sleeping again, because that dopamine just stopped hitting, with that blue light at 11 o'clock at night. And then finally, the third thing I learned was I started learning again. I wanted to actually read books long form. I wanted to write notes. It was like a deeper study, because my attention span grew. It had been reduced to just a few seconds, and I was on to the next thing. But now I had a longer attention span to read full books again. And I was called Becca Book as an 8-year-old. So I was like, I got to recover this. This is my OG titles. I've got to learn to love learning again. And so what are personal benefits that you experienced? I know the churches got their story, but I'd love to hear, as you got to know God and yourself and your people and your family and your wife and your daughters, what were some of the sweetest things that you encountered in that detox for you?
Well, certainly as a family, what started out as being quite terrifying for my children, because they just thought our family is going to be known as the family that takes phones away from kids, There was lots of tears, mainly from me. But what was interesting is watching over the course of that progress, over the course of that detox, is it moved from being anger and anxiety to everyone universally was glad that they did it. In fact, 100% of people who do this are glad they did it.
Yeah.
No one has ever said to me, I really regret I could have spent more time doom scrolling. Yeah. And I really regret that. Yeah. Everyone's glad that they did it. So my marriage is better. My awareness of God's presence is better. My attention to my children, my connect. I have 3 teenage daughters, as you know. My engagement with my daughters was so much better. Yeah. I mean, it's like returning to becoming human, right?
No, it really is.
Slowing down.
And I think that's what's so beautiful about this for everybody is, we have to recognize, you have to stop long enough and go, what was my life like 20 years ago before I had this device? I think I recognize how much my brain was having a hard time focusing. I mean, I love to read. I love to learn. I love to consume information. It's part of the work I do at THINQ is trying to understand what's happening in the world and then disseminate it in a way that's helpful. But even for me, thinking as logically and clearly as I used to was starting to slip.
Yes.
And by implementing some new practices, and there's so many different ways people can do this. This is really like a kickstart to saying, how do I reset this whole part of my life?
Right.
Because 28 days and then going back to what we used to do isn't the answer. It's actually 28 days to lead you down a path to go, okay, now I'm going to re-enter and I'm going to change some habits about where my phone goes in my house, about what time of day I'm going to pick it up.
Yes.
And there's so many different apps. There's the RO app, ARO. We love that app that's designed to help people put their phone down. And it actually tracks not just your screen time, but now it's tracking how much time did you set the phone down and what did you do in that time? And it's actually really encouraging. Families can use it to gamify kind of the fun of that. There's a little device called a brick. I know several friends, and I've used this too, that's a brick that's like this pretty cheap little box that you touch your phone to and it turns off multiple apps that are distractions. And you can't turn them back on until you touch that brick again, which means if you leave it at home and you leave, which has happened many times for me, I leave home thinking I've opened up a couple of things I needed and I did not. And so that meant all day I wasn't going to have access to Safari. I wasn't going to have access to Twitter or any social media.
Gabe is buying that brick for everyone he knows. So he might put one, our kids,
I think it's great.
Their boyfriends, their girlfriends, and it is helpful just to have kind of something you scan that you say, I want to be offline. And instead of having to close and open every single app every time, because inevitably you're run out of time or you will be tempted to not do it. But when it's already kind of automated with those essentials versus non-essential apps.
It's great. I use both those tools. I use RO and brick.
And other friends, have taken, I know one of our friends, Joel, he sets up everything on a different device at home in one location. So if he's going to go to Instagram or Twitter or any kind of social media, he doesn't have it on his phone.
It's on an iPad. Yeah. And if he is going to engage in those platforms, it is while he is over with this device and then he leaves it.
Yeah. It's physically something you've set up. And so these are all the types of systems I think are going to be critical as we look at the years ahead to set up for ourselves, for our families, to be able to live these embodied present lives.
Yeah, I'd love to talk for a minute about schools and families. A lot of these listeners are front lines in all industries and moms and dads going, okay, hear what you're saying, and hopefully our church will be doing this. But whether or not they are, we want a proactive step. I saw a post the other day where a teacher in Jersey was talking about they have gone screen-free in their school. And it was just very anecdotal, but basically said during lunch, now they'd use the pouches. And they said during lunch for the last couple weeks, these kids are playing cards, they're laughing, they're talking. And the teacher was marveling. He says, it feels like we went like it was about 11 years ago. Like we went back in time about 11 years before this really took off and took over.
Isn't that remarkable?
Which was wild because we were in New York City kind of towards the end of that time about 11 years ago. And I was like, yes, I remember that. Like it was this slow bell curve, like that early adoption. And then it just skyrocketed very quickly. And then all of a sudden, once it got hooked in, it was hard to reverse. So to imagine these schools making these hard decisions, your daughter's school's doing it, one by one schools, whether that's the board decision or the principal's decision or sometimes a statewide decision. I believe this is going to be a snowball effect because if these kids are like, we actually kind of like it. We're hanging out. We're talking. Our kids would watch us, like videos of us in college without our friends. We acted like idiots, but they were like, you had so much fun. I'm like, we just had to make up dumb stuff to do because we had nothing to distract ourselves. But let's talk about schools. What are you guys seeing trending in the country right now? We were talking for a minute before we got on camera. What are you excited about, expectant about regarding even Jonathan Haidt's book and the impact that it's having?
Well, I'm real excited and really optimistic about what is happening, particularly in the phone-free school movement. It's nicknamed Bell to Bell. And I love that. And certainly there are the innovators and the early adopters. There are the principals and headmasters who are going, all right, I'm going to take the hit from that handful of parents who are saying I can't reach my kid during the day and I'm mad about that.
Yeah.
But there is this wave that this is moving toward the majority. Mark my words, in the next year, it's going to turn into most schools. I think within 2 or 3 years, every school will be phone free. It's just sort of this momentum that is already happening before our eyes.
It's a tipping point.
That's right. That's right. The interesting thing about smartphones in schools and smartphones in general is that, the iPhone came out in June of 2007, but it was not the device that it is today. There was no app store. There was no social media. There was no front-facing camera. There were no notifications. There were all of the things that the technology has evolved so much, and it has become more and more destructive and addictive as time has gone on. The smartphone, to begin with, was a universally positive device. But as time has gone on, instead of us mastering these devices, they have begun to master us.
Yeah.
And that is certainly true of kids. So my daughter's school has just gone phone free, and I asked her week 1, how's it been going? And she said, Dad, the boys are playing football again. I thought, isn't that interesting? They're running around again instead of sitting in the corner just doom scrolling. This seems like a no-brainer now, doesn't it?
No, it does.
And if you understand the body, the regulating rhythm of recess, quite frankly, is actually what calms the brain, right? Just getting that movement in the middle of being sedentary. Nobody really was wired to be sedentary for 9 hours at a time. And so we're wondering why our kids are manifesting and what the symptoms look like ADHD. But quite frankly, it's just being human, right? You need to walk around. You don't sit for hours and then not engage in conversations, not have this reciprocity in having these conversations, but also moving your body. So I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful that even by removing this, it's adding this.
And I'd also say for you listening and you're leading your family, or you're a leader of any organization, a school, perhaps you're on a board at a church or a school or any kind of institution, a college, think about what would it look like for you to introduce something like this in a way that it's a group activity. It's not just the solo individual trying to be the hero, but it's actually a community coming together. And that's what the Digital Fast is about. And so we've partnered through THINQ Media alongside Darren and the work that he's done, alongside the technology app called Aro, to create this experience for people so that they can have a really easy onboard into trying this out for 28 days. And so part of that, Darren, your book, Digital Fast, we've created a workbook that's going to help people not just, again, get away from the device, but actually start working towards what does life look like outside of that. Describe a little bit why that's so important, that we don't just put phones down, but we replace it.
Yeah, well, fasting is not just putting something down, it is picking something up. It is not just abstinence, it's also engagement. And so the success, particularly when it comes to managing digital technology, is so different if people are replacing that doom scrolling time with something else.
Yep.
And there's research that Cal Newport has done a bunch of research on the importance of replacing that with something that is healthy. So we've created a workbook where you're taking the time, you're taking the digital distraction time and replacing it with a time of devotion. And we've created an analog experience where you are going to be writing and drawing and connecting dots and all kinds of different things, just like a very physical analog experience where you're replacing that digital time with a time where you're really engaging your heart and engaging the word and engaging in prayer.
Yeah.
And it becomes a really moving spiritual experience.
And every person in your family can do this. So if you have children, they can go through their own workbook and so on. And so this is available on Amazon. People can go actually get the book, get the workbook. But go to digitalfast2025.com. This is where you're going to actually see the momentum. You're going to see a lot of churches that have signed on and institutions and colleges that are now deciding we're going to do this. We're going to do it either in January. So a lot of people will go January 1 to 28th, kick off the new year. And then some are choosing to do it in the lead up to the Easter season called Lent, where they're saying, hey, we're going to take those first 4 weeks. And as a community, we're going to go through it then. And so what you're going to see is a groundswell in the spring of people putting down the devices, and it's being led by this movement. And so if you go to Digital Fast 2025, you can learn more about that. And then what we're doing through THINQ is also providing access to several talks that are 9 minutes or 18 minutes conversation starters for you to sit around your living room and actually listen together, learn together, have conversations together about why this is so important. how do we start to revisit what it means to be human? And what is that going to do, not just for us, but for our family and for our community? So I want to encourage everybody to check that out. Sign on. You'll see a lot of churches and organizations signing on, but you as a parent can sign on. You can say, hey, I'm going to do this for my family. I'm going to do this for the little area that I have some sort of stewardship over, so that us as a community can start to experience the freedom that comes from that. Darren, as we head into this moment, I mean, what are some of your prayers as we look at 2025 that could change? I mean, we could be looking 90 days into 2025 and seeing people living very different lives. What are some of your hopes for that?
Well, I think that some parents particularly feel a little hopeless. They have unknowingly done what I did when my kids were old enough to do sleepovers or play school sports. I wanted them to have a phone. I grabbed an old iPhone from a junk drawer in my kitchen and I gave it to them. And so I unknowingly gave my children at a very young age the most powerful consumer device that human beings have ever had, you know. And so there's a sense that parents have that's like, wow, the ship has sailed,
right?
You know, I've given my kid social media and I've given them a smartphone. And so then my challenge to that is, if a ship was sailing and you knew it was going to go down, if a ship was sailing and knew that there was a significant problem, we do have the capacity to turn a ship around, right? Just to keep that metaphor. So my encouragement would be, if you're not sure really how to handle it or how to rein it back in, do a digital fast as a family.
Yeah.
So that is parents and kids all stepping back from these distraction apps for this season, and then re-engage the conversation and go, how did that feel? Is it a better life?
Yeah.
The thing that really makes me excited is that this is an opportunity for the church to be leading the way in a major societal problem. Obviously, whether you're a person of faith or not, you know this is an epidemic. Like, people are realizing that their lives are worse as they are enthralled in these devices. And this is a way forward. It's so difficult to know what to do, right, with this. And so this is a very practical next step. There's a sense of like, oh, I should do this. Well, now my church is doing it. If not now, then when? Like, let's just do it together.
Yeah.
And this is a chance for a church to have a very relevant societal message and a way forward for something that is a widely held new problem that we feel.
Yeah. And I want to speak to the single person listening, to the mom listening, to the dad listening. This is something that's been prepared so that you can go through it. If you're single and your church might not be going through it, talk to your church. But if they're not, find your group of people that you are doing a weekly gathering with, a Bible study with. Just find somewhere where you can have this communal accountability and have this conversation together. I would say for parents who feel like they want to raise this idea as a family, but they've almost lost some of that equity with their kids because of the phone already. They want to present this or say, let's do this, but the kids kind of already shut them out, and they feel like they're trying to rein that back in to have the relationship. I would just leverage this, especially over the holidays you've got going into the new year. We always do a Rhythms Challenge in January as well. If you want to jump on with that, there are going to be other people in that whole community, thousands that do this together. I think we had about 5,000 do this together back in January. So you won't be alone. Talking to other moms or dads trying to do this with their families as well. So there are multiple ways to engage this, and I'll be doing that with you as far as like equipping and encouraging you throughout the month of January. But the goal here is that you have an inner circle, whether you're doing it corporately in a larger group, collectively, but you still have an inner circle that you're doing this with. And so if you're single, or you're doing this as a family, or you're doing this with other moms or dads who have teens, like, share best practices. Like, what are the conversation starters that helped your kids want to do this? And how were you checking in and taking inventory week 1, 2, 3, and 4 of what was effective and what wasn't? I think this is, again, something that took a while to unravel, takes a while to repair. But we do believe that this will have exponential impact because you're doing it with people around you.
So Darren, thank you. Thanks for leading it. So excited to see the way God's taken it much further than I know you even imagined when that first
Absolutely.
moment happened and you rolled it out to our church. And I love your faithfulness in it. And we'll just keep praying with you and together seeing what God wants to do with it for so many lives and so many families. So thank you.
Thanks for being so supportive
for
of
doing
this.
this.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. It's always fun to hear Darren explain like this vision, the way it's impacted him personally, but the way now hundreds of churches are about to participate in this.
Yeah. The collective action piece is the key, right? It's not anybody trying to do this on their own. That if I'm doing it, you're doing it, kids, like you have people around you that are all making this a utility device and not a distraction device. And if we eliminate that distraction, that allows us to be more present, which is really what we're trying to do in this connect rhythm, to connect with people and feel known.
So you can learn more about this conversation, host your own conversation with your family or friends by going to thinkmedia.com/tech detox. And when you go there, you'll see all you need to do to take advantage of those talks and conversations. You can also at a collective action project level with your church or your school or your business, be a part of the Digital Fast at digitalfast2025.com. Well, we hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving, being fully present with your friends, with your family, giving thanks for all the ways God's blessed our lives. And you can grab the Friendsgiving Guide at RebekahLyons.com/Friendsgiving. Happy Thanksgiving.